have you ever been told you're too emotional to make a decision, especially by your own child? I'm Elaine Morley. I'm 66, and a year ago, my son sat across from me at dinner and said I wasn't capable of handling money anymore. So I rewrote the family trust, without him. You might think that's where the story ends. But really, that's where everything began. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. I remember it clearly, the first Saturday of October, the year the chill came early to Ashland. The kind of morning where the sun shines like it's trying its best, but the wind still makes your bones ache. I had just refilled the hummingbird feeder and stood on the porch watching a few late bloomers dart around it. The maple tree across the street had turned a stubborn orange overnight, and the leaves swirled around like little notes from someone I used to know. 8 years. That's how long it had been since my husband passed. People say time softens things, but I think it just puts a blanket over them. You still know what's underneath. I live alone now, in the same house we bought back in '87, a modest, wood-framed place tucked under the hills. The porch groans in the mornings, just like I do. There's a rhythm to everything here: oatmeal at 7, radio at 8, laundry on Wednesdays, bills on the 1st. Familiar. Predictable. Steady, but not full. My son, Griffin, used to call every Sunday. 5-minute check-ins, nothing too deep. Lately, it's just texts. You good? Weather okay? That kind of thing. Short. Efficient. Like I'm part of his to-do list between meetings and market reports. That morning, I got a text from him, simple: dinner next weekend. Just us. Nina can't make it. No emojis. No hope you're well. Just the logistics. I stared at the screen for a while. I don't love traveling down to San Jose anymore. The long bus ride, the noise, the way the city never seems to exhale. But I told him yes, of course. I always say yes. I've made peace with being the one who bends so things don't break. The night before the trip, I packed the same overnight bag I've had since Griffin graduated college. Inside, one good cardigan, travel slippers, a tin of Earl Grey just in case they don't have any. On the bus, I sat by the window, watching the world rush by without needing me in it. Somewhere near Reading, I started thinking about the trust. The family trust, I mean. The one my husband set up years ago for the kids. Back then, Griffin was fresh out of business school and already acting like he owned half of Wall Street. He offered to manage things for me, just until I got used to being alone. I said yes, because that's what I do. But lately, something had been tugging at me. Nina's been struggling. Her teaching job barely pays the bills, and she never asks for help. I'd been thinking it might be time to shift things, to give her more of a safety net. She would never say it out loud, but I saw the stress in her shoulders when she hugged me last time. Griffin, though, always had opinions about fairness. A few months ago, when I sent Nina a check to help with her car repairs, he called me within the hour. "Mama, you have to stop bailing her out," he said. "Let me handle the gifts and stuff, it needs to be balanced." Balanced. That word stuck with me. Like I was tipping some invisible scale wrong just by loving my daughter the way I needed to. The dinner was at their condo. Modern, spotless, no photos on the walls. His wife, Elaine, had made lasagna, though she barely touched her plate. It was mostly Griffin talking, updates about work, a new investment property, his golf handicap. I nodded when expected, smiled politely. I waited until coffee was poured to bring it up. "I've been thinking," I said, gently. "About the trust. About maybe revisiting some of the terms. Nina's situation's changed a lot, and I just want to make sure she's..." Griffin didn't let me finish. He set his mug down, real slow, and looked right at me. "Mom," he said, not unkindly, but firm. "You don't need to worry about that anymore. You're not exactly in the best place to make financial decisions." I blinked. "I mean, you get emotional. You always have. And money, it's not about feelings. It's numbers. Logic." I didn't say a word. I nodded. Smiled. Took another bite of lasagna that had gone cold. It felt like chewing concrete. On the outside, I looked fine. On the inside, something cracked, something I didn't even know was still holding. I sat there at my son's table, with my hands folded neatly in my lap like a polite guest, and I thought, this is what it feels like to be managed. That night, back in the guest room, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan and asking myself a question I never had before. If I keep letting him decide what I can and cannot handle, do I even belong to myself anymore? After I came home from that dinner, something shifted. Not in a dramatic, thunderclap kind of way, just a quiet ache, like the floor under your feet moved a hair and only you noticed. The bus ride back from San Jose was long, and my legs cramped up halfway to Ashland. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept hearing his voice, Griffin's voice, saying I was too emotional for money. Like he was doing me a favor by steering the ship while I sat blindfolded in the back. Back when Henry, my husband, passed away, I didn't question it. Griffin offered to handle the estate, said he'd walk me through the process. I remember nodding, grateful someone knew what they were doing. I was a mess back then, sleepless, numb, eating boxed mac and cheese like it was a food group. So when he said, "Don't worry, Mom. I got this," I let him. He moved fast. Within weeks, he had the house title reviewed, the investments reshuffled, the passwords changed. All I had to do was sign an initial where he pointed. I told myself, he's your son. He's trained in finance. This is his world, not yours. I even said it out loud once, he's just better at these things than I am. I said it enough times, I almost believed it. In the beginning, he'd still ask for my opinion. But over time, the questions became statements. "We're shifting this into a different account. I moved your savings into something more aggressive. No point in sending Nina another check, she'll just use it on art supplies again." That one stung. I'd slipped Nina a few hundred after her car broke down last year. She didn't ask. I just knew. Griffin found out and confronted me like I'd robbed a bank. "Mom, she needs boundaries. You can't be her safety net forever." I remember mumbling something about it being my money, but he was already walking away, muttering about long-term strategy and financial literacy. It's strange, the way love can wear a mask. I thought I was being taken care of. But looking back, it wasn't care, it was control with a polite smile. A few days after I got home, Nina showed up at my door without warning. She brought me a container of lentil soup, still warm, and a painting a student of hers had done, a wild swirl of color she said looked like hope in motion. She placed it on the kitchen counter and said, "It reminded me of you." We sat at the table, my fingers wrapped around a mug of tea I never drank. She didn't mention Griffin at first, but I knew that look. She was holding something. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever feel like people treat you like you don't know your own mind?" I looked up. She didn't blink. I said, half laughing, "That's just getting old, sweetie. Everyone thinks they know better." She didn't laugh. She just asked, real quiet, "But do you think Griffin knows better?" The air went still. I looked down at my hands, resting on the wood grain I'd polished every Sunday since 1992. "I don't know," I said. She leaned forward. "Mom, do you feel taken care of? Or do you feel managed?" I didn't answer right away. That question sat in my chest like a stone. It was so honest, it hurt. Then she told me. Apparently, Griffin had called her last week. Asked her, casually, of course, if she'd noticed anything off about me lately. Said I'd been making odd decisions and wondered if it might be worth talking to a neurologist. I laughed at first. One of those sharp, involuntary sounds that has nothing to do with humor. Then I just sat there, stunned. My own son, wondering if I was still mentally fit, because I dared to question the financial plan he'd written without me. He's worried, Nina said, choosing her words carefully. But I think it's more about control than concern. I felt like someone had pulled a thread I'd been clutching for years and it unraveled all at once. This wasn't just about money. It was about power. It was about who got to decide what I was capable of, and when. I stared at that student painting, bright red slicing through a cloud of navy blue, and suddenly, I envied it. It didn't need permission to be bold. Later that night, after Nina had gone home and the kitchen was dark, I stood at the sink rinsing out our mugs. I caught my reflection in the window, soft lines, silver hair tucked behind one ear. I looked calm. But underneath, something new had taken root. The email came on a Monday morning. I was halfway through my second cup of tea, scrolling through weather alerts and grocery coupons, when I saw it. Subject line, Trust Revision Proposal, Morley Family Estate. The sender, Rose Hollow Legal Group. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. I clicked the attachment and stared at the document. It was polished, full of formal language and bullet points, but one detail leapt off the screen like it was written in red ink. Griffin had listed himself as the sole trustee. Nina's name wasn't mentioned, not once. No co-trustee. No backup. Nothing. I sat there for a long while, rereading the lines over and over. I didn't remember agreeing to anything like this. Then again, Griffin had a habit of presenting decisions as updates. Not conversations. Not invitations. Just facts delivered after the fact. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, Mom, he said, like everything was normal. Got the document? I did, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Why is Nina not included? There was a pause. Just long enough to make it clear he hadn't expected the question. It's just simpler this way, he said eventually. You know she's not great with numbers. And she's got her hands full with work and the kid. That doesn't mean she shouldn't be involved. He gave a soft sigh, like I was being unreasonable. Mom, look, you don't need to worry about this stuff. You should be enjoying your time, not stressing about logistics. I'll take care of it. Nina doesn't really think about the long term, anyway. The way he said it, flat, dismissive, like she was a child playing pretend, it made something inside me clench. You didn't ask me, I said quietly. You didn't ask what I wanted. I didn't think I had to, he said. It's what makes sense. That's when it hit me. To him, I wasn't a decision maker anymore. I was someone to be managed. Like one of those plants that needs indirect sunlight and a reminder app. Later that day, I sat in the sunroom and looked out at the patchy grass we never got around to fixing after Henry died. The yard was quiet. Just a squirrel hopping across the fence line. The house creaked the way it always did when the temperature dropped. I started thinking about patterns. About how easily some people get pushed to the edges. When Nina was 12, she told us she wanted to go to art school. She'd drawn this beautiful, haunting picture of our old tabby cat sleeping on the windowsill. You could see every strand of fur. I still remember how proud she looked when she showed it to us. Henry took one look and said, "That's sweet, honey, but art won't pay the bills. Let's aim for something more practical." She didn't say a word, just folded the drawing and put it in her notebook. I didn't defend her. I didn't argue. I just sipped my coffee and hoped she'd understand. When Griffin got into business school, we threw a dinner party. Steak on the grill, new tablecloth, even champagne. I remember telling him, "You're going to do big things." And he did. But Nina? She kept her head down. Worked odd jobs. Painted in the basement. Became a teacher. Never asked for much. She didn't expect applause. I didn't mean to favor one over the other. I just followed the current. And now here we were, Griffin steering the ship, and Nina swimming alone, quietly, in his wake. That evening, Nina called. She sounded tired, like she hadn't slept much. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Did you stop the school payment?" I blinked. "No." "Why?" "I got a notice. Tuition balance overdue. They said the automatic payment was canceled." I froze. I hadn't canceled anything. She sighed on the other end of the line. Griffin said it was moved into a separate account. Some kind of investment opportunity for the family. I didn't want to upset you. I stared at the phone, heart pounding. That was money I set aside for my granddaughter. Not for stocks. Not for portfolios. For school. For a little girl who wanted to be a vet, who still drew horses in the margins of her homework. And he moved it. Just like that. That was the moment it all clicked into place. I wasn't being helped. I was being handled. And if I didn't do something, soon, I'd be managed out of my own family entirely. Not because I was incapable, but because I'd let them decide I was. I put the phone down. I walked over to the filing cabinet, pulled out the original trust paperwork, and laid it flat on the dining table. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From clarity. It was time to read the fine print, not just on paper, but in my life. I wasn't a burden. But I was about to become a problem. And I was finally okay with that. It was early Tuesday when I called Rose Hollow Legal Group again. I didn't want Griffin's lawyer. He'd already made me feel like a guest at my own table. I asked to speak with someone else, someone who could walk me through my options without looking over their shoulder for my son's approval. That's how I met Margot Price. She sounded steady on the phone, didn't rush me. Said she could meet in person that Thursday if I could come down to Medford. I said yes, hung up, and immediately began second-guessing myself. Was I being rash? Was this petty? But then I remembered the tuition notice. The way Griffin said "don't worry" like a spell meant to keep me quiet. And Nina's voice on the phone, tired but kind, never angry. So Thursday morning, I ironed my blouse, the one with the pearl buttons I usually saved for funerals and school recitals. I took the bus to Medford with a folder in my lap, the original trust inside, creased but intact. Margot was maybe mid-40s, hair pulled back, no nonsense but not cold. She read over the documents without judgment, just a quiet nod here and there. Then she folded her hands on the table and looked me in the eye. "You're of sound mind, Mrs. Morley. You're within your legal right to amend this trust however you see fit. That's simple." I nodded, but my chest tightened like I'd just stepped out on a wire over a canyon. I wasn't used to having full control anymore. I'd forgotten the sound of my own signature when it meant something. We spent 2 hours going over the details. I asked questions, real ones, not the polite kind you ask just to feel included. Margot answered every one. I told her I wanted Griffin removed as trustee. That I wanted Nina included not just in name, but in structure. Equal distribution. And I wanted a portion, small, but meaningful, donated to a local nonprofit that supports senior women living alone. When I finally signed the paperwork, my hands were steadier than I expected. No ceremony. No drama. Just ink on paper and a quiet breath I hadn't taken in years. I left the office, not feeling triumphant, just lighter. On the way back, I stopped at Harvest Creek Cafe. The place hasn't changed much in 2 decades. Same creaky booths, same smell of cinnamon and burnt espresso. I hadn't been in there since Henry's funeral, and I almost walked past it, but something told me to go in. I ordered tea and a slice of pecan pie. Sat near the window. That's when I heard someone say my name. It was June Carlson, from my old church group. Her hair had gone fully white, but her voice was exactly the same. Warm, with a hint of mischief. She sat with me, no invitation needed. Said she'd been meaning to call, but time slips faster the older we get, doesn't it? We caught up in bits and pieces, her knees, my roof, grandchildren, missed potlucks. Then, as the conversation slowed, she leaned in slightly and said, I heard about Griffin. About the trust. I must have blinked, because she added, word travels, especially when lawyers are involved. She stirred her coffee slowly, then said, my daughter did something similar. Said I was too forgetful to manage my house deed. Next thing I knew, I was in the guest room of her condo, and she was making decisions in my name. There was no bitterness in her voice, just history. She looked at me and said, when your children start speaking for you, when they tell you what you think, what you need, how you feel, that's when you stop being a mother and start being a line item. That stuck with me. A line item. I walked home that evening feeling like I'd just set something important back in its rightful place. Not to prove a point. Not to teach a lesson. But to reclaim something I didn't realize I'd given away. Back at home, I pulled out a fresh folder and labeled it in thick black ink, Updated Trust. I slid the papers inside and set it in my desk drawer. Griffin didn't know yet. I hadn't told him. I wasn't afraid, just waiting. Waiting for the right moment. The moment when silence would no longer protect what mattered. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was a correction. A course made true again, not for spite, but for fairness. I was no longer waiting to be considered. I was done asking for permission. Somewhere in all this, I started to feel like I was betraying Griffin. Not because I'd done anything wrong, because I hadn't, but because I was starting to see him clearly. Really see him, not as my son, not as Henry's golden boy, but as a grown man who believed I no longer knew what was best for myself. There's guilt in that kind of clarity. I kept thinking about the last time Henry and I sat on that old back porch together. The night was cool, a September breeze brushing through the cedar trees. He had his arm around my shoulders, and we were talking about retirement. About the future. That was the night he said, half laughing but dead serious, if anything ever happens to me, Griffin'll take care of you and Nina. He's solid. He gets it. At the time, I nodded. I believed him. Griffin was always sharp, always sure of himself. Confident in a way that made you want to believe he had all the answers. But lately, I'd started to wonder, did Henry mean Griffin would protect us, or that he would assume control? I hadn't made up my mind fully yet when Griffin showed up at my house, unannounced. It was early afternoon, and I was just finishing up reorganizing the pantry, something I always did when my mind was racing. I heard his car door slam, and I glanced out the window to see him stepping up the porch steps, a leather folder tucked under one arm and a man I didn't recognize trailing behind him. Hey, Mom, Griffin said as I opened the door. His smile was tight. Too bright. This is Andrew. He's here to help us finalize some things. Nothing big. I didn't move. He glanced past me. Can we come in? I stepped aside, slowly. They settled into the dining room. I stayed standing. Griffin opened the folder and slid a document across the table. It's just a revised power of attorney. Makes everything cleaner for taxes, simplifies logistics if anything happens. I looked at the pages, didn't touch them. The wording was slick, standard legal phrasing, but I'd read enough trust documents the past few weeks to know what I was looking at. If I signed, Griffin would have permanent control over my financial decisions. Over the house. The trust. The healthcare directives. Everything. I looked him straight in the eye. Why now? He blinked. What do you mean? This wasn't mentioned before. Why now? He cleared his throat. Well, things are shifting. Nina's not exactly stable. And I've had concerns. Concerns? Yes. About your memory. You forgot my birthday last year. I almost laughed. It wasn't even true. I'd mailed him a card and texted him the morning of. Then he added, Look, let's not make this a thing. It's standard. Andrew works with dozens of families like this. It's just structure. Andrew nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable. I think he expected me to just sign. Instead, I smiled. Andrew, I said calmly, would you mind stepping outside for a minute? I need a word with my son. He hesitated but got up. Once the door clicked shut, I leaned on the table, folding my hands together. You think I've lost my grip, I said. Griffin sighed. Mom, please. This isn't personal. You're right. It's not. It's about power. He leaned back, looking tired. You're being dramatic. I smiled again. This time it reached my eyes. I took a cognitive assessment last month. Just to be sure. 96 out of 100. Near perfect. Would you like to see the report? He didn't answer. I walked into the kitchen and came back with a sealed envelope. Slid it across the table. You can open it when you get home. What is it? Just something I thought you should have. He stared at me. What's going on? You'll see. For a moment, we just sat there in silence. I could feel the power shift in the room. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt, not anymore. What I felt was clear. Centered. For the first time in a long time, I was speaking from solid ground. He stood up, folder still open in front of him. This is a mistake, Mom. I tilted my head. You've made plenty for both of us. He left soon after, didn't say goodbye to Andrew, just marched out the front door and down the steps like he had somewhere urgent to be. I closed the door gently behind him. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel cruel. I just felt like I had finally stood up and said, this is my name on the deed, this is my life, and I will not be erased from it. Whatever came next, whatever that envelope did to his pride, I could live with it. Because finally, I was done living in a house where every room had someone else's lock on the door. He called that night. Not even an hour after he left my house, the phone rang and I didn't even need to look. I knew it would be him. That kind of silence, the kind he left with, it never lasts long. I picked up and said hello like it was any other day. No edge in my voice. No anticipation. I'd already made peace with what was coming. What the hell are you doing? He snapped. Are you out of your mind? Did Nina put you up to this? I let the pause settle before I answered. I wanted him to hear the quiet. No, I said. Nina didn't tell me to do anything. This was my decision. He scoffed. I could practically hear him pacing. You've completely rewritten everything. You just, what, cut me out? Why? Because I tried to protect the estate? You think you know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said calmly. And for the record, I didn't cut you out. I took you out of a position you weren't honoring. His voice dropped, tight and cold. I was managing the trust like Dad would have. You're just too emotional to see the logic. There it was again, that word. Emotional. Like it was a disease only women caught after 60. I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the dark yard. The porch light buzzed quietly. Everything in the house was still. You keep forgetting, I said softly. I'm not just some file to be organized. I'm your mother. You don't get to file me under liability because it's convenient. He didn't speak right away. Then, dryly, he said, Mom, come on. You're making this dramatic. You've always been. Stop, I cut in. You don't get to call me dramatic. I've been quiet for a long time. I've nodded along, stayed out of your way, agreed to things I didn't agree with, because I thought that's what mothers do. But I'm not going to nod anymore. His tone shifted then, sharp again. You think you can just rewrite everything like you're some kind of authority? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I'm an old woman, I said. But I've lived long enough to know my value. And I don't need your approval to claim it. The silence on the line grew heavier. I took care of you, he said finally. I stepped up when Dad died. I handled everything. You did, I agreed. And I was grateful. But somewhere along the way, you stopped helping me and started replacing me. He didn't argue that. He just muttered something under his breath and hung up. I sat down at the table, let out a long breath, and stared at the phone. Then, it rang again. I answered without looking this time. It was Nina. Her voice was soft. Nervous. Hey, Mom? I just talked to Griffin. Figured you would. He's upset. I know. There was a long pause, then she said, I didn't ask for anything. I don't want anything from the trust. I just want you to do what feels right. I closed my eyes. She kept going, voice a little unsteady. But, if this is the first time you're doing something because you believe in it, not because it's expected or polite or what someone else told you, then I think you're doing exactly what you need to. Something in me released. I didn't know I'd been holding my breath until that moment. I don't think I needed validation. Not from her. Not really. But hearing those words, from the child who had spent her whole life not demanding anything, meant something I didn't have language for. Thank you, I said. And we sat in silence for a few seconds. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. After she hung up, I went back to the counter, turned off the light, and stood in the dark for a moment. My reflection in the window looked tired, but not defeated. I asked him to meet me at Harvest Creek Cafe, the old place down by the parkway. I knew he wouldn't like the setting, too public, too ordinary, but that was part of the point. I didn't want this to happen in a sterile office or behind my front door. I wanted it to happen somewhere that felt real, somewhere with chipped mugs and the faint smell of burnt toast. He showed up on time, in his usual navy sport coat and that impatient air he wore like cologne. He looked around like he was hoping I'd already be seated, then saw me by the window. I'd ordered him black coffee and nothing else. He didn't sit right away. What's this about? He asked, standing over the table like I was the one late to something. I motioned to the chair. Sit, Griffin. This won't take long. He sat, barely hiding his annoyance. I didn't give him a chance to start in. I slid the envelope across the table. This is the final revision. The trust, the donations, everything. I wanted you to have a copy. He didn't open it. Just stared at it like it might bite him. What's the donation? He asked flatly. A portion will go to a nonprofit in Jackson County. They provide housing and legal support for senior women, especially those at risk of being displaced or manipulated by their families. His jaw tightened. You're using our family's money for strangers? No, I said calmly. I'm using my money, the money your father and I built together, for what I believe in. He sat back in his chair, arms crossed, voice rising. You're betraying everything Dad stood for. No, I said again. I'm not betraying anyone. I'm just, finally not betraying myself. That silenced him for a moment. He picked up the envelope, turned it over in his hands like he was trying to see through it. This isn't about the money, is it? He said, quieter now. It's about control. I nodded. Yes. It is. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. And maybe, in a way, he didn't. Maybe this version of me, the one who said no without apologizing, who made her own decisions without checking for permission, was someone he'd never really had to face. He leaned forward. You know I was just trying to protect you, right? I met his eyes. But you weren't. You were protecting an image of me. One that suited you. The quiet mother. The cooperative widow. The woman who didn't challenge you. He looked away, out the window, at the people walking past with strollers and lattes. I don't agree with this, he muttered. I know, I said. You don't have to. I pulled a pen from my bag and took the final page out of my folder, an addendum confirming I would not be making further changes to the trust. I signed it in front of him, my hand steady, then placed it neatly back inside. I've made my decision, I said. And I'm at peace with it. He didn't say another word. Just stood up, tucked the envelope under his arm, and walked out. No hug. No goodbye. Just the soft jingle of the door as it closed behind him. I didn't follow. I didn't try to fix it. Instead, I waved the waitress over and ordered a cup of cinnamon tea. Sat back in the booth, watching the steam rise as the day settled outside. The cafe had gotten a little noisier. Someone's toddler was babbling near the pastry case. An old man spilled some sugar on the counter. Life went on. It's been a week since Griffin walked out of the cafe without a word. You'd think I'd be replaying that moment over and over, his silence, the look in his eyes, the weight of that envelope tucked under his arm. But I'm not. I'm sleeping better than I have in years. My days have fallen back into a rhythm, but it's different now, looser, like a knot has come undone. I still tend the plants out front in the early mornings, prune the roses, sweep the walkway. I make my tea around 9, sit by the kitchen window with the paper, though I mostly just skim it now. The radio plays soft jazz while I fold laundry or chop vegetables for soup. It's a quiet life. It always was. But the difference is I'm no longer filling the silence with shame. I don't wonder what Griffin thinks. I don't pace around the house imagining what I could have said better. I don't feel guilt for disappointing him. For the first time, I'm not measuring myself by how someone else receives me. That realization came slowly, like a tide rising unnoticed until you look down and your feet are already underwater. I used to equate silence with surrender. But now? Now I see it as peace. As choice. A decision not to keep fighting for something that never really made room for me. I've said enough. The world didn't fall apart either. Griffin hasn't called. He hasn't shown up, or sent another lawyer, or tried to argue me down. I don't know if that means he's nursing his pride, or if he's finally understanding something he couldn't before. A few days ago, I got a card in the mail. Simple, pale blue envelope. No return address. Inside was a birthday card, late, but thoughtful. A watercolor of wildflowers on the front. No long message, just a single line in familiar handwriting. I trust you know what you're doing. It was signed, Elaine. His wife. I sat down on the couch and read it twice. Then a third time. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt a soft kind of gratitude, Not because I needed her approval, but because someone saw me. Really saw me. I placed the card on the mantel above the fireplace, next to the ceramic robin Nina made in 8th grade and a photo of my granddaughter holding a pumpkin almost as big as her. I didn't put it there for decoration. I put it there because it reminded me that sometimes clarity doesn't come from those closest to you, it comes from the ones watching quietly on the edge. Nina came by the next afternoon with her daughter, Clara. They brought groceries, mostly vegetables I didn't need, but it wasn't about the food. We made pasta together, and Clara insisted on grating the cheese all by herself. We laughed, spilled flour, burned the first batch of garlic bread. It was the kind of messy, lovely afternoon that makes time feel like it stretches out just a little. Later, while they were washing up, I went into the hallway closet and pulled out a framed canvas. Clara had painted it for me the month before, a swirl of orange and blue, her version of Sunset at Grandma's. I took down the wedding photo that had hung in the dining room for over 30 years. Not out of anger. Just readiness. I hung Clara's painting in its place. It felt like a declaration. Not against what came before, but in honor of what is now. We don't talk much about the trust. Nina knows, of course, but she never brings it up. What matters to her, and to me, is that we finally sit at the same table, equal, seen, free from the quiet expectations that used to hang over everything like fog. Family doesn't need to follow scripts. It just needs to feel safe. That evening, after they'd left and the dishes were done, I sat on the porch as the light faded. The air smelled of baked apples and pine. Somewhere down the block, a wind chime rattled gently. I watched the sky turn violet behind the trees. I thought about all the years I stayed quiet because I was afraid. Afraid to be called difficult. Ungrateful. Afraid to lose what little peace I thought I had. But what I've learned is this. Peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's delay. And self-respect, it's the kind of inheritance you leave yourself when everyone else is done dividing the rest. I lost some things in this process. I might still lose more. But what I gained was worth it. I speak less now, but when I do, I mean it. And that, to me, is enough. I spent many years staying silent so I wouldn't lose the people I loved. But in the end, the only thing I truly needed to keep was my own respect. You know, at this age, I've learned that peace doesn't always come from making others understand you. Sometimes, it just comes from understanding yourself, and being okay with where you stand. If any part of my story felt familiar to you, maybe the silence, the second-guessing, or the moment you finally chose yourself, I hope you know you're not alone. Have you ever gone through something like that? Something that made you realize your voice mattered more than you thought? If this story spoke to you in some quiet way, I hope you'll stay with me for the next one. We've still got a lot of life to talk about.